Welcome to our latest of our conversations on YouTube for Catholic Concern for Animals. And we are absolutely delighted today to have with us the Chief Executive of the RSPCA, Chris Sherwood, which will be a bit confusing for me because I've got two Chris's now on the line, but I'll work through that. And we have no end of things to talk to Chris about with what's been going on in the whole area of animal welfare recently. And I'm sure we could talk to Chris for several hours, but we won't impose that on you. We'll try and keep it down to under an hour with this, and I'm sure Chris wouldn't want that either. But let's kick off, Chris, by talking about the RSPCA as an organisation, because it is in many ways a unique organisation in that it almost has an enforcement role. A role of I mean, it's one of the organisations which actually ensures that animal welfare legislation, that animal rights are respected and enforced in this country. I mean, that cannot be an easy task.
Well, morning, Gerald, and morning, Chris, and thank you so much for the invite to join you. It's a real pleasure, and I'm sure we're going to have a really interesting conversation over the next 40 minutes to an hour, because there's lots to talk about around animal welfare at the moment. And you know, the RSPCA is an amazing organisation. I still have to pinch myself to remind myself that I am the Chief Executive of this august and important organisation that's been at the forefront of animal welfare since we were founded in 1824. And that kind of combination of rescue, prosecution and advocacy and campaigning and prevention, that combination of those three different activities has been at the heart of the organisation since we were founded back in 1824. And, you are right, we are a unique organisation. Our inspectors, we employed our first inspector in 1824. We had uniforms before the Metropolitan Police. We had animal protection legislation on the statute book since 1822. So it really goes back into our history. And the model that was developed in the 1820s was a model that was replicated around the globe. So, we have SPCAs in as far away as Malawi, New Zealand, Australia, Hong Kong, right over into North America, into the provinces of Canada. That movement was sparked by what was decided in a coffee shop in St. Martin's Lane with a group of our founders, including William Wilberforce. We were prosecuting before the CPS was founded in 1986, and our officers have been investigating allegations of cruelty and neglect for nearly 200 years now. But we published our new strategy earlier this year, Together for Animal Welfare, which set out a vision of where we want the organisation to be by 2030. So we've got a 10-year vision. And we do think it's a time to really review that role, because at the moment we are campaigner, we are investigator, and we're also the main prosecuting body for animal cruelty in England and Wales. In fact, we take forward about 80% of the cases that go through the courts through prosecution. What we announced in our strategy, which I think might be behind your question, is that we felt it was timely to review whether we are the best placed organisation to continue to prosecute animal cruelty cases. We've just had a really important piece of legislation, the Animal Welfare Sentencing Act, come onto the statute book, which has increased the time that somebody may be sentenced to prison for from 6 months to 5 years under the Animal Welfare Act. That's a really big responsibility for a charity to take on board. So we've started some discussions with the government, with the Crown Prosecution Service, about a potential transfer of that prosecuting responsibility from the RSPCA to the CPS, so we can really concentrate on that core investigation role. And what we think is really key with that is that we achieve powers for our inspectors under the Animal Welfare Act. They currently don't have those statutory powers, which makes us a bit of an anomaly. Our sister organisation in Scotland, their officers have powers under their animal protection legislation. The Republic of Ireland, their officers do as well. So we'd like to see the potential for a different model for how we investigate and prosecute animal cruelty cases here in England and Wales.
It's interesting. There are things there I could pick up on, but I want to actually move on, because I don't think there are significant changes going on in our country which are going to affect you and the way in which you work. And the most obvious one, the most widespread one in many ways, is the end of the restrictions with respect to the pandemic, and the effect that that's going to have on both companion animals and on wildlife, as people, I mean, hopefully there will be the ability for people to work from home in the future, but also people get back to offices and get into offices, as the government seems to be so keen to ensure. Now, we've heard how the wildlife has benefited from, frankly, humans not being around, but on the other hand, companion animals now, many of whom were brought into families during the lockdown, will now for the first time experience the opposite of that, and the neglect of humans. I mean, that must be something which you are considering the implications of as an organisation.
Absolutely. I mean, we've just been through a major, social, economic crisis with the kind of tragedy of the COVID pandemic, and it's touched all of our lives. And the kind of whole shift in our organisation, we had 400 people that went from being office based to being home working in the space of 5 to 10 days, which was an amazing achievement by our IT team, and our whole working practices and our inspectorate and our animal rescue centres had to change. We were really concerned that if COVID broke out in one of our animal centres, who would provide the care for those animals? Because sadly, Gerald, animal cruelty and neglect didn't stop just because there was a pandemic. In the first year of the pandemic, we answered over 1 million calls and rescued over 23,000 animals. And it was really important for me in my leadership of the RSPCA, because I am a real fan of history. And when, in an organisation like the RSPCA, it's important to understand where we've come from to help you think about where you're going to go to. And our officers continue to work through previous crises. Our officers went to the battlefields of northern France to support horses and mules that went to war in the First World War, and our officers worked right throughout the Blitz in London during the Second World War. So it was important during this crisis that we continue to provide that frontline animal protection service. And I'm so proud of the role that our inspectors and animal rescue officers and our animal care assistants and our wildlife care assistants played in continuing to provide that vital frontline animal welfare role. It changed a lot. We were talking about PPE and social distancing and new ways of working, but we continue to provide that service. But I think what was behind your question was more about what sort of social trends have we seen. Well, it's pretty well documented that we saw a massive rise in the number of people who were trying to buy puppies and kittens and cats and dogs. We've seen a huge influx of puppies into the country. In fact, the legal import was around 50% more between the year before the pandemic and the year after the pandemic. And unfortunately, we've also seen, because the price of puppies increased significantly during the pandemic, that's given opportunity for terrible criminal gangs to be able to exploit that. So alongside that legal import, we've seen a growth in the illegal import of puppies and dogs into the UK. And we've also seen, criminal groups exploit that desire for a puppy through selling puppies on the internet, and being able to find ways to basically to kind of breed puppies and sell them within the country as well. So we have seen that explosion. That has definitely caused some welfare issues that we are concerned about. We've worked really hard with the other animal protection charities to get messages out about what to do when you're thinking about buying a puppy or a kitten. Certainly do not go and buy a puppy on a service station on the M1, out the back of somebody's car. That's a really bad idea. You shouldn't be thinking about that in that way. I think that coming out of the pandemic, though, there are a few things I'd say around that. We are worried that, particularly when we get to the summer of next year, everyone's desperate to go on holiday. That is a peak time for abandonment of pets, because unfortunately some people don't want to or can't afford to put their pets into kennels or to catteries or to pay for someone to care for them. That's a trigger for the abandonment of animals. So we're a bit worried about that. The summer next year could be tricky. The second issue is, you read anything in the pages of the Financial Times or the Times at the moment, there's financial pressures coming. We've got, some pressure on cost of living, with rising gas prices, inflation, a new tax rise. There is a correlation between economic challenges and abandonment of animals as well. We saw that after the last credit crunch, where the RSPCA saw a 15% increase in numbers of animals coming into our care after the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And the PDSA saw a massive pressure on their subsidised veterinary services during that time as well. So we might see more pressure on our services. But I think the third thing I'd say about coming out of the crisis is there are some welfare challenges that kind of went a bit hidden, during the pandemic. Our lives got much, much more local. Somebody myself, I used to spend my whole life on trains. I sort of joke, I spent 6 months in the same bed. I've never done that in my adult life because I'm normally living at hotel rooms, traveling around the country and doing things. But that's a feature that all of us had. And what that's meant is that those kind of equines who are not being taken care of in fields, we have not been spotting as much of that. So we might see some of those welfare problems that are being stored up coming out. So I think what I've learned during the pandemic when it comes to animal welfare is that you make some assumptions about what's going to happen, and it doesn't quite play out that way, I mean, one thing that really surprised us in the RSPCA was equine rehoming. We've had real challenges before the pandemic of being able to rehome horses and ponies, and actually coming out of the pandemic, we're at some of the lowest levels of equines in our equine stock that we've had in recent years. So there'll be some unexpected surprises coming out of the pandemic as well.
I think one of the things that this points to is the way in which, firstly, most importantly, human beings have an impact on all animals, on the whole of nature. We didn't talk about farmed animals, but we'll come on to that. But also the way in which changes in human behaviour, in the human environment, actually has an impact on animals. It's like the old story, isn't it, about employee gets a bad time for his boss, he goes over and kicks the dog, and things like stress and inequality, poverty, things of that nature have an impact on these kind of relationships, on the way in which we treat the animals in our home and the animals outside of our home. Has the RSPCA had to react to those kind of things, change its strategies to deal with the changing nature of society over the past 40, 50 years?
I think you've kind of, for me, really landed on where our strategy is focused. Our new strategy together for animal welfare, as I said, we published at the beginning of this year, because it's very much looking at that interplay, that relationship between humans and animals. Much of the cruelty and neglect that we see, if not the vast majority of it, in our society is as a result of human behaviour. And that relationship that we have is what we're really trying to get people to be thinking about. In our kind of thought leadership role, it's really that interplay, that relationship between animals and people, because, our inspectors, the majority of the issues they see when they're out there responding to those calls from the public, we get 1.5 million calls a year, 150,000 investigations. The vast majority of that is neglect through lack of understanding, lack of skills, lack of awareness about the impact of people's behavior on animals. My cat loves dreamies. He loves a treat. He gets very grumpy when he only gets 5 dreamies because he'd quite like a handful of them. But the easiest thing for me to do is to give him more dreamies, and he can be a really chunky cat. It's that awareness around actually the calorie content of treats, and being aware and treat aware when giving your cat treats, because overweight animal presents a lot of health issues. So it's that kind of best of intentions but can be the worst outcome. That's much of what we see out there, which is why our role as the P in our name, prevention, is so important, is getting the knowledge, the skills out there about how to get it right for animals. I am pleased to say that the deliberate acts of cruelty, which is intentional, are the vast minority of the work we see. Don't get me wrong, that still happens, and there are some pretty awful examples of deliberate acts of cruelty that we see in the RSPCA, which break my heart. I've spent far too much of my career working in aspects of society where you see when people really can be pretty horrible to each other and to animals. One of the things that I saw it relate was, you know, people being deliberately cruel to their partner, but also were often deliberately cruel to their pet as well. There's a real correlation between domestic violence towards individuals and children and animals. So, you know, it's a sort of part of our society that we do see at the RSPCA, but it is the minority of the work that we see. So for me, that kind of getting the knowledge, the information, the skills out there is really important, because most people want to get it right for their pets. They don't want to inflict pain or suffering on their pets, but we've got to get that knowledge, that information out there. It, you know, starts with young people, you know, and I know I'm sort of taking quite a lot of time, but one thing that really does worry me about what I'm seeing in society at the moment is the impact of these things. You know, I've been double vaccinated, mobile phones, because, you know, when I was at Relay, one of the worries that we had there was young people being exposed to online pornography, which I'm sure will be a concern for your stakeholders, but actually young people are being exposed to acts of cruelty to animals. You know, we did some survey work around this a couple of years ago. Very few young people have actually seen deliberate acts of cruelty and abuse to an animal, but through platforms like Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, young people are getting exposed to those acts of cruelty in a way that's never happened before. And my real worry about this is, are we having a generation of becoming desensitized to those acts of cruelty because it's background, they're seeing it regularly. I think like 1 in 4 young people have seen that on social media. And for certainly my generation and our generation, that's all happening in a way that we might not have a window into. I mean, I don't know how to use Snapchat. I tried it once, I didn't understand it. You know, I deleted it off my phone. But, you know, young people are seeing that material, and their parents, their grandparents might not be aware of what they're seeing. And what's that doing to their attitudes and behaviours towards animal welfare? So we've got a role, I think, as leaders in animal protection organisations, but also as members of society, to make sure that we are getting those messages about positive images of animal welfare out there, and to really challenge some of those content that can be produced by young people. And we had, you know, stories through our National Control Centre, our main phone line, of young people feeding alcohol and cigarettes to pigeons, you know, setting a squirrel on fire to get that juicy content that can go on social media so you get your likes. That's the kind of stuff that we need to challenge, really.
It's funny you should mention that, because actually when you were going through the first part of your answer, I mean, I am on Instagram, and because I follow a few organisations, I get these animal videos, and most of them are either have people who, I mean, like for example, there was a trend recently, I hope it stopped, where people were deliberately just putting down one pellet for their animal at feeding time, you know, for their dog, seeing how it reacted, you know. And this was something you put on Instagram, and you know, it seems that on these platforms, animals are seen either as a form of entertainment or as you know, with the influencers with their, you know, designer dogs, as a status symbol. And I think that's absolutely appalling. These creatures have personalities. They are beings in their own right who deserve to be treated as such, not used as somebody's entertainment on whatever social media platform it is.
I completely agree with you. You know, I saw a video recently on social media which was awful. It was from Australia, and you know, there's a bird called a magpie in Australia which does have a tendency to attack. And they were deliberately goading these magpies to attack them, to get content for social media, and you know, because they want to get likes. And
yes,
you know, I think you know, social media is not the problem. Actually, you know, it's very easy to sit here and say, "Oh, social media is terrible." You know, social media has brought huge benefits to people in our society. You know, through the pandemic, what would we have done without the joy of being able to connect with our families through things like Zoom, and being able to stay up to date with what our friends and family are doing through platforms like Instagram? I love Instagram. My Instagram is full of cats and cake, because I love cats and I love cake. You know, and it brought me a lot of joy. And it's how we use it that is the issue. And that's the message that we're trying to get out there, is about how we use it. What content are you liking? What content are you sharing? Who are you following? What are you producing and putting up there yourself? If you went on my Instagram feed, it's full of pictures of my baby Marmalade looking very handsome on social media. You know, so there's a lot of positivity that's out there as well. So I think we just have to be careful not to criticize the actual medium. It's how we use it is the issue, and what we're liking and what we're sharing. And you know, it's going to take all of us to get those messages out there, because, you know, young people, they're seeing this content at an age, you know, that, they have access to more information than any generation who's ever lived on the face of planet Earth. And they're doing so at an age where they haven't necessarily always developed those kind of values and principles about what they should and shouldn't like, or what they want to like and what they don't want to like. And it's important for organizations like your own, like my own, like all of us, to kind of play that role in kind of evangelizing for a different way of thinking about these things.
Yeah, I accept that. I mean, I'm certainly of an age where I remember days before social media, and certainly those attitudes still existed in society, although they weren't so publicly broadcast, as it were. Let's move on, because I mean, one of the things that we've had in very recent history is suddenly a government which has, I mean, you know, there has been an array of animal welfare legislation in the recent past, but this government all of a sudden has put the foot on the accelerator of that, and we have a vast array of, you know, the animal sentencing bill, the sentience bill, all these kind of things. How does that impact on you in terms of the RSPCA, and then, because, you know, I mean, legislation is something you have to be aware of and have to take into consideration with the role that you take on.
Yeah, I think you know, you are right. I think animal welfare is in the spotlight at the moment. It's in the sunlight, which is a great place to be. But I think that whilst it's in the spotlight, you do have to take a step back and remind yourself, you know, we've been at this for 197 years, and governments of different colours and perspectives come and go. And you've got to be careful not to attach your colours to one mast, you know, because there will be a time after when we're in the spotlight. And it's making sure that you're thinking about that. So for me, when we've got a real interest in animal welfare, and that is great to see, you know, that is a bit of luck, but also a credit to all of the organisations in our sector who've been making the case for why animal welfare matters. You know, I think, and I think it's not just why animal welfare matters, why we should do something about it. Because I think people go, yeah, animal welfare matters and we care about animals, but why should we do something about it? Why should there be investment in it, or behaviour change, or legislative change? You know, we've been making the case for that, because there is a case we make about why animal welfare matters and why we should do something about it. But we've got to be mindful that we won't always be in the spotlight. So for me at the moment, let's try and see how much legislation and behaviour change we can advance during this period of being of interest, but also make sure that we're not resting on our laurels, and continue to make that case and build that case about why animal welfare matters. Because if I think about, you know, what I've learned in my time as, you know, I've been a CEO for 7-8 years now, you know, and I've been a CEO, you know, during quite a period of turbulence. You know, we've had 3 systemic shocks to our society, with the credit crunch, Brexit, which has had an effect on how we as a country operate in our economy, and we've now got the pandemic. There's going to be more challenges that are going to come up, and they're going to impact on animal welfare. The obvious one, because we're talking ahead of COP26, is the impact of climate change. You know, you can't separate out animal welfare from climate change. You know, intensive farming, methane production from intensive farming is one of the big drivers of climate change. And the changing climate is going to impact on animals and their natural habitat. So there is a kind of correlation or a causality between, you know, climate change, animal welfare, and climate change. So we've got to think about that. At the moment, because I'm talking big picture, you know, specifically, we have got some important pieces of legislation. The one that I think is really important that the government is proposing, which I really welcome, is the Animal Sentience Bill, which will establish an Animal Sentience Committee, which will be in effect a public body, looking at animal sentience and animal welfare across government, with the ability to review different government decisions. That is an advisory body to ministers, despite some of what our critics are saying. It's going to allow, you know, bureaucrats and animal rights activists to dictate government policy. It will be a mixture, I'm sure, of different perspectives and views, but there to advise ministers and to be able to offer up good, intelligent advice. We've seen the benefit of that already through the Climate Change Committee, which seems to be the model that the government is looking at. And there is already an animal sentience model in Scotland as well. So that for me is a really important piece of legislation that's currently working its way through Parliament, and we really want to see that passed so that Animal Sentience Committee can get to work, because there are just so many facets of animal welfare that go right throughout the public policy agenda. You know, I was speaking with a minister earlier in the week around planning, and the link between planning and animal welfare. You know, we've got, you know, flooding and animal welfare. There are so many different facets of public policy that animal sentience and animal welfare matters in, really. So yeah, we're in the spotlight, which is good to see. There's some important bills. I think the government's action plan for animal welfare was really good to see. We welcomed that. There are some areas, though, Gerald, that we're not so happy about, which I think you might go on to, though.
Yeah, I think you're right. And certainly I'm not inviting you to be partly political about this, Chris. It would be inappropriate for all of us to be so involved. But I mean, governments and governance inevitably impinge on what we do. And this government has done, you know, some remarkable things and some interesting things. I mean, the two things, you know, which I will go on to, is firstly the current crisis in pig farming and what's going on there. And you know, I mean, I think that you can say, well, it's all right having the legislation, it's right, animal sentence, but you have to act on that. You have to provide not only for the farmers, but for these pigs who are being whose welfare is being undermined by, you know, something which is nothing to do with them, nothing to do with the farms to a great extent. And the other thing is, of course, you know, we continually say, and let us hope it continues, that we have some of the highest animal welfare standards in the world, but the government is currently seeking trade deals and has exercised trade deals with Australia. It's seeking trade deals with the United States. And, you know, I would imagine that your organisation has an attitude about where animal welfare ought to be within those kind of negotiations.
Well, there's two big topics there. So
that's true. Sorry about that.
No. I'm very happy to expand on both of them. I mean, I think it is incredibly frustrating, anger-inducing, sad to see what is happening on pig farms at the moment. You know, the kind of potential cull that the National Farmers Union talked about in the region to 100,000 to possibly 150,000 of healthy pigs who potentially are going to be culled on farms is something that we really take issue with. You know, let's be clear, farms are not set up for slaughter of that kind of scale. You know, let's also not be unrealistic that, you know, we would like to see alternatives to CO2 slaughter taking place in slaughterhouses, but slaughterhouses are set up to slaughter at that scale. And the current challenges around recruitment and workforce availability in slaughterhouses is an issue that we would really like the government to take seriously. I mean, I think in the press this week we're seeing some move from the government to kind of free up that labour market. But that slaughter, you know, that is a pretty unprecedented slaughter of that kind of scale of healthy animals. And it's really disappointing and frustrating to see. And not just for pigs on those farms, but also for the farmers themselves. You know, this is not going to be, you know, this is going to be a very challenging set of activities in slaughtering those pigs that farmers are going to have to do. And that is going to be difficult for the pigs on those farms, and it's going to be difficult for the farmers. And so we are really concerned about that. You know, I think that this is a problem that's been, you know, a colleague of mine used to talk about the idea of the sort of slow-moving car crash. You can see it happening before the car hits, and it feels a bit like that with this particular issue with the cull of pigs on farms. You know, this has been spotted for a while now, and here we are, and all of a sudden it's all over the press. But it's been an issue that farmers have been aware about and have been lobbying government on. So I think that we would like to see, you know, some moves by the government here, however they do it. But clearly this is a difficult position in the run-up to Christmas, and a difficult position for farmers and for those pigs. So yeah, we're really disappointed to see that we're in this situation. And you know, not to make a kind of too much about it, but you know, this is one of the challenges that we're seeing as we move out of the European Union and with Brexit, that we see a challenge here. You also asked about trade deals. You know, I think it's really important to say that the RSPCA, is not against or supportive of trade deals. That's not our area that we comment on. We accept the political environment that it is at the moment, and the government is advocating for a position around global Britain and negotiating free trade deals. And it's not for us to comment on whether free trade deals are a good thing or a bad thing. But where we will comment on, though, is around animal welfare standards within those free trade deals. And I think we were really concerned by what happened with the Australia free trade deal. And that animal welfare wasn't a red line in that free trade deal. And our worry is, there will be some imports of animal products from Australia into the UK, but clearly it's a big distance from us to Australia. What I think our real worry from that was the precedence it sets for future negotiations with other jurisdictions, that, and somehow we're prepared to negotiate our hard-fought welfare standards away in those free trade deals. And having tariff-free trade in animal products from jurisdictions where animals can be raised in conditions that would be illegal or unacceptable in the UK is a real concern for us. And it's a concern from an animal welfare perspective, but it's also a concern for our farmers as well. So we would like to see the government take a stronger line on animal welfare. I think we're really concerned at the moment, the Agriculture Act, there was a big battle over that Agriculture Act around how to enshrine that protection of farm standards, farm welfare standards within it. And the compromise position the government adopted was the establishment of the Trade and Agriculture Commission. They're going slow, though, in appointing that Trade and Agriculture Commission, which is a little worrying because we've got the Australia free trade deal, and there's a free trade deal with New Zealand, which we're less worried about because New Zealand standards are not too dissimilar from the UK's. But the government is going slow on that, and that's a key reassurance for the public, for farmers, for politicians about what's in those free trade deals. So we're disappointed that that commission hasn't been established yet, and that the government is going slow on putting that into effect. So this is one of the kind of challenges that we're seeing as we moved out of the European Union, is these free trade deals. And I think for animal protection organisations like our own and Compassion in World Farming, we are upping our game, so we're able to really review those free trade deals from an animal welfare lens perspective and make sure the voice of animals is heard in the national conversation around those free trade deals.
I'm sorry about the little technical glitch I had there. I apologise for that. But just to pick up on a few points you made there, I think it is important to say that I don't think, we're not worried. We're not going to advocate against economic measures, against free trade deals, against things like that. The point for us is that if we have animal welfares in this welfare standards in this country, they are protected and that they are allowed to be implemented properly. Otherwise, what's the point of having them? And trade deals are a part of that. There's a wider issue as well, isn't there? Because the current issues we have with things like shortage of heavy goods vehicles drivers, there's already kind of issues with transportation of animals around the country. Is there a potential that the shortage of people with skills like HGV drivers is going to have an impact on the welfare of animals that we transport around?
Well, I think you can't divorce what's happening within the wider economy and society from what's happening for animal welfare. We had issues with the recent fuel crisis of our inspectors being able to refuel their vans, petrol stations. But, I am inspired by the positive stories that came out of that. We heard stories from our inspectors of people allowing them to go to the front of the queue. I know we always hear in the press about all the examples of police cars and ambulances being stuck in the queue. But alongside, let's not forget, there are those positive stories that you don't hear as much about. And we did hear about those, which was inspiring. I think the challenges around HGV drivers is going to impact, potentially on, availability of animal feed and veterinary drugs and all those distribution networks. Animal welfare is a kind of thread that goes through the wider economy. So there are going to be those potential implications here. So you can't sort of separate the two out. And as I said, that correlation between economic pressure and what happens in animal welfare is something that is well known from previous difficult periods of economic uncertainty. So we'll see the potential challenges emerge around that. So yeah, I think you can see that.
Yeah, I think the point that I think we would also like to make is that while we've been talking about the welfare of farmed animals, I mean, we as an organisation would prefer people to stop eating meat and to actually, improve animal welfare through that means. But as long as the farm animals are there, we need to look after them and protect them. On which note, I'll say, Mr. Fegan, is there anything that you wish to contribute at this stage?
Well, as always, Gerald, you're conducting a wonderful conversation here. always cautious about coming in and stopping the flow of your debate with our guest. But you've already covered an enormous amount of ground, I have to say.
True, yeah.
So I'll make one or two little points, just if I may pick up on some of the stuff regarding comments about behavioural change. And of course, this is crucial to what we do. It's trying to, as an educational charity, trying to, educate, you use that word, people's behaviour towards animals. And we, that there are, as Chris has said, always a minority of people who will abuse animals like they abuse other humans, I'm afraid. I mean, that's just part of some people's makeup for whatever reason. But a lot of the cruelty and abuse, or maybe cruelty is a better word, is actually through ignorance, whether it's through feeding habits or what have you that Chris has referred to. So obviously education for us is a crucial part, and obviously we will always support the RSPCA in trying to get the general public to understand their animals, both domestic and wild, better, so they can coexist with them better. And obviously education is critical in that. And obviously that's part of our ongoing Dominion debate, our relationship that we're having within the organisation about what is our relationship between the non-human creation generally and what, from our perspective, did God mean it to be? And going back to our Dominion debate from Genesis, which is even older than the RSPCA, might I say.
Just
about 10 times as older.
I don't think the RSPCA was there with an inspector when Noah led the animals onto the ark.
There's someone there with a clipboard. Anyway, so clearly that, that one thing we share about is that as well. Then looking at other things like government legislation, clearly we are obviously also very interested in trying to participate and have our say in the ongoing debate about proposed government legislation. And it is good. It is good to see governments of any colour taking animal welfare seriously. It's as Chris has said, the governments come, governments go, without wishing to make too fine a point on it. And we need to keep animal welfare, and obviously in front of whoever's in charge of our government, whether that's not national or indeed local in the UK. Local government as well has a key role to play in animal advocacy. So we shouldn't forget the role of local government in the UK. Going on to, I'll quickly try and cover some of the ground. Going on to the awful situation regarding the pig slaughter in the UK. And, we talk of these, and Chris has said, these huge numbers of animals that are involved. And he mentioned how difficult it is, or could be, for the farmers themselves through logistical reasons, having to do this, but also emotional reasons as well. And it reminded me of one of my favourite characters in English literature, incidentally, which was Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy, who had to deal with his wife wishing to slaughter their pig on their small holding, and he couldn't cope with the trauma of it. And it greatly affected him. He was a very sensitive individual. So he's, that's just one pig rather than 120,000 pigs. But it just brought home to me when I read the book for the first time, how people, his wife was used to it and didn't affect her at all, but it greatly affected him. So there are these sensitivity issues, as well as the horrible logistics of 120,000+ animals. And then lastly, I'll just cover the trade deal issue. And this is obviously a great concern, and we are concerned about this Australia trade deal, because one of the things we were told, and here may be slightly critical of the current government, we were told that animal welfare standards would not be lowered in any way, shape or form by leaving the European Union. And it does give us concern that that Australia trade deal is not consistent with that message. And obviously, as Chris has said, you know, the number of animals possibly involved in Australia, because it's so far away, may not be that huge, but the standard it's set for all our other negotiations is the problem. And that's a great worry. So I think I've covered a little bit of that, and now I don't say much more because I don't want to stop too much the flow of your conversation.
Well, very generous of you, Chris. I think you know, I mean, it's worth mentioning at this point the activities we've been involved in with respect to kangaroo meat and kangaroo leather, which is a real issue with coming over here. I mentioned before, I think, I'm not sure where I mentioned it on one of these conversations about the Iceland aisle, which has, you know, kind of kangaroo meat and ostrich meat and all these different things. Hasn't quite got to the level of having the stuff that they eat in I'm a Celebrity, but I mean, maybe that's where we're going. I don't know.
We have a member of the government's cabinet now who was on I'm a Celebrity, I think. So who knows where that will go.
Our culture secretary, Nadine Dorries.
Culture secretary, yeah. I think she's on that programme, I believe.
Well, obviously a message for our future diet there. Chris, coming back to you, I mean, we've talked about a lot of negative things, but let's kind of get to a bit more positive aspect, because I think one of the things which has struck me in my lifetime is how much more we are now talking about the way in which nature in general, animals specifically, contribute to our well-being, to our health, and to us as human beings. This has arisen in all sorts of ways. I mean, the last Labour government started to create a welfare measure, which included things like hearing songbirds and stuff like that. We've had it in terms of people being involved in going out into nature, from urban backgrounds and people who are suffering from stress and other issues in their lives, going out into camping and into nature to experience that. And of course, we've experienced it with companion animals as well, being taken into various situations like hospitals and old people's homes to improve the welfare of the people in those places. To what extent, is that something which the RSPCA is welcoming and is enjoying that kind of discussion? Because it's certainly something which I think is new in terms of the way in which it's become public.
Yeah, I think the the pandemic was awful. let's underline that. Far too many people lost their lives, and we're going to have resulting effects on mental health, and we're going to have long COVID and pressures on our economy as a result of the pandemic. But there were some things that we could take as green shoots for a positive new future. And I think one of those things, on your point, Gerald, is around place. I think as animal protection organisations, there's an opportunity for us to be thinking much more about kind of community, place, localism, because the world got a bit smaller during the pandemic, and people were aware much more of their local communities. You saw city centre shops, really suffering, but actually commuter town shops and coffee shops and those kinds of things doing really well. And I think the reason why I mention place and community is because that's where I think that we can be having some influence and impact, is how are we rewilding our local communities? How are we making sure that we've not got concrete all over, our local communities? How are we making sure that we're designing communities which take into account animal welfare? There's some real opportunities for us on that. And I think, that's already a feature, for instance, of what the new Minister for Climate Change, Julie James, is saying in Wales, is that, there needs to be a real focus on, animal welfare, the environment in place. So I think there's an opportunity for us to talk about that. And I think that rings with what you said, Chris, already, that it's not all roads lead to Westminster. We've actually got, with the levelling up agenda, the creation of metropolitan mayors and city mayors, and what the government is talking about, whether they deliver it will be interesting to see, because governments often talk about it, is a shift of power and responsibility from Westminster to local communities. I think there's a kind of opportunity for us to be really getting the animal welfare agenda into that focus on localism and place, because, you know, that's kind of where this stuff can start and make a difference, really.
Yeah, given that probably every government in the existence of the RSPCA has talked about increasing powers for local communities, yeah, we probably need to see how that one goes. But yeah, I think it is. I think what you said about the pandemic and you know, people becoming more aware of their communities is important, and I certainly think, again, in my lifetime, the emphasis has gone away from communities and towards us, you know, moving for work, us not having the same kind of links and roots. I mean, my children certainly haven't got the same kind of links and roots to us as a family in terms of locality, in terms of you know, what's going on, as I have with my family, and that makes a big change. And the other thing as well is that this, of course, all links in with climate change and with the environmental problems that we're having, because as we see the issues of climate change, we are losing biodiversity, we are losing habitat, we are losing those kind of things which actually help our welfare, help our mental health, help our physical health. And that's I mean, that is a big picture issue, and obviously something which I would have thought the RSPCA would have issues kind of like getting involved with that, because, you know, what you're focused on is individual cases more than the bigger issues, although of course the implications are there.
I think, you know, as an organisation, we've been there at the forefront of these national conversations around that relationship between animals and people that we talked about earlier in the conversation, Gerald. You know, and
yeah.
You know, you look at the kind of legislative agenda in, you know, Westminster in the UK over the past 200 years, you can see the fingerprint of the RSPCA within it. And I think, you know, we obviously very mindful of that, you know, focus about what kind of society do we want coming out of the pandemic. You know, going into the pandemic, we had a mental health crisis in our society, you know, the kind of, you know, 24/7, always being on call, you know, dashing around the country, you know, long commutes, was creating a kind of mentally distressed population with mental health issues rising in the population. We've got an opportunity coming out of the pandemic to kind of fashion a different way of working in a new society. And we're trying to do that as an organisation ourselves. You know, we've just introduced at the beginning of this month, October, our new Hello Hybrid working model for people who are office-based. And we're taking a really flexible approach. We're not insisting that people have to be in the office certain days, because we want to create that much more flexibility choice. You know, I think recognising that some people coming out of the pandemic are desperate to hug everybody, and other people still want to keep that 2 metre social distancing. So, you know, we're creating a kind of a workplace which is really putting primacy on that idea of flexibility and choice about when people work, where they work. And that for me is trying to live some of those values as well. And I think, you know, again, one of the green shoots that I think did come out of the pandemic is the kind of rebalancing of that work-life balance. You know, I know with my own colleagues, in fact, in my own life, you know, being able to take your kids to school in the morning because you're not dashing off on the commute, or doing that Pilates class. It sounds terrible in the class, isn't it? A Pilates class at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, I think that kind of work-life balance aspect is important as well. So I think, you know, I looked at Greta Thunberg's speech this week where she talked about politicians saying blah, blah, blah. And, you know, they say all the good words, but they don't deliver on them. Actually, you know, I'm one of many leaders, as Chris and yourself are, in the charity sector. It's all very well for us to espouse our views about what others should do. We've also got to do that in our own organisations as well. And I think that is you know, there is a bit of a wake-up call about actually how are we promoting flexible working, how are we thinking about reducing our own carbon footprint, and how are we promoting equality and diversity and inclusion, because we need to look like the kinds of communities in which we work in as well. So these questions, I think, are important for us as leaders within our own organisation, as well as what we're saying to the world about the kind of society that we want to fashion. Because, you know, let's be clear, the RSPCA is an organisation that's about social change. You know, we want to change the world. You know, we want to create a world that's kind to animals, that relationship, you know, is recognised between animals and people, and is one which is really promoting the importance of animal welfare, and that it's everybody's responsibility to do something about that, not just the RSPCA. That's because we believe in social change. We want a world which is, animal welfare and the kindness towards animals is at the heart of it. So that's what we're focused on as an organisation. And we want to achieve that. We need to carry our people with us, and we need to make sure our own house is in order as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's very true. I mean, I'm tempted to not to go too far into that, because I mean, otherwise, we'll all be examined under this microscope. I'll be having words with Mr. Fegan about that after the. But I think you're right about the pandemic. I think there was this big kind of feeling that after the pandemic, because of the social change the pandemic engendered, there was a chance to, as has been said, build back better. And I think that's something which
build back butter. Then I was going to say, build back almond spread, rather. Gerald.
Build back beaver, perhaps. Whatever. But it would be nice.
Like a Boris speech there.
Several of them put together. But I think it would be, kind of like nice to kind of see some concrete action in that regard, if that's not an appalling metaphor in this regard, but some action towards that, because I think people want to see that. People want to see more emphasis on communities, more emphasis on local regrowth, more emphasis on things like rewilding and so on. And even, we've had the royal family making these comments about the emphasis on climate change, rather critical of, some entrepreneurs who have been putting big rockets into space. But, I think that is significant and important. Chris, is there anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, just a general point, actually, which I hope is relevant to what you've just been talking about, which is obviously the changes to work practices, and Chris has outlined some in the RSPCA following the pandemic about people's work behaviours. And of course, prior to the pandemic, we'd seen a growth of people working in a sector where they didn't have security of work. They had contracts that were, well, there weren't any contracts really. Yeah. And it reminded me, going back to the conversation about place and relationship between us as a species and creation and nature in place. And it reminded me, again, as some things often do, to Wainwright and his wish to get into the lakes at the weekend after his 9 till 5 Monday to Friday work had ended. He his whole life was getting off out of there and getting off into the lakes and walking, and his relationship with nature, which of course is now part of the British tradition. For Wainwright is seen by many as a very key figure, as indeed he is, in a relationship with the open spaces. And again, but his life was controlled by his Monday to Friday 9 till 5 existence, and then the weekend he had his time. And of course, that was then written about many times and further. I can't really resist one of my favourite songs from my home city, Manchester Rambler by Ewan MacColl, which basically the same stuff. Monday to Friday, he was out there. Weekend is his time. Yeah. A bit more critical of the class system, perhaps, than Mr. Wainwright was with Ewan MacColl. But we won't go further down that line. But the same principle. Monday to Friday, I've got to do this. The weekend's my time. Yeah. And of course, now the society's moved on, of course, since Wainwright's time and even Ewan MacColl's time, and the whole society has changed. And the pandemic is an opportunity for people to rethink, as the RSPCA did, people's work, home life, relationships further again. And maybe they don't have to wait till the weekend now to go on and see some wildlife or see some activity in place. They can maybe do it instead of going to Pilates at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They might want to go to their local wild reserve or whatever. So all this structural change in society is interesting. And the pandemic, of course, we'll see what occurs. I hear obviously that Chris's organisation is taking one particular route. I'm well aware, as you said at the start, I think, of the conversation, Gerald, that the government are trying to push a lot of people back into their offices, not least of which to get them back onto trains. Chris has gone off his train, but they're trying to push people back onto trains because the train companies need that revenue as well. So there's all these dynamics going on. So obviously, I'm sure Chris's local train operator will want him back Monday to Friday going into the office. Well, there we are. Got the bicycle now. So, and that, of course, another change. People now are cycling more. So all these things about societal change and how they affect us, but then, of course, how they affect us affects the animals we have relationships with, both companion and wild, which is where you came in the conversation early on, I think. So, you know, these are very, very interesting, big subject matters.
They are. We've talked about a lot of big subject matters, and time has gone amazingly quickly. I mean, as I said at the start, we could probably talk to you for several hours. I'm not going to try and do that, although I'm tempted. But one last thing I would like to ask you: we've talked. You've talked about the RSPCA's strategy and the way forward. We've touched on different aspects of that along the way, but maybe you'd like to unpack that a bit and talk about where the RSPCA sees itself going forward and what the new strategy for the RSPCA is about.
Cool. So we spend quite a lot of time in the organisation talking about who are we and where are we going. You know, we involved, because we've obviously got our branch network, which are a really vital part of our animal welfare impact. What we were really trying to think about was how can we have the biggest impact with every pound that we spend to really advance animal welfare. And I think that, you know, the two concepts at the heart of that is that idea about the relationship between animals and people. And the second is that animal welfare is everybody's responsibility, not just the RSPCA. We can't do it alone, which is why our strategy was deliberately called Together for Animal Welfare, because it's going to take all of us to create that world which is the kindest possible to animals. So that was the kind of idea behind it. In that, we talked about kind of three big priorities, really. Our core rescue and care work, our inspectors are a vital part of the tapestry of services and protection for animals, and they're really, really critical to our future. Our animal rescue officers are our inspectors, so our rescue, our care work with our vets, with our nurses, our wildlife centres, our animal centres, our branches, that is a really core aspect, because, you know, we do predict that unfortunately there will still be a need for that investigation, rescuing and caring work into the future. But if we want to get ahead of these problems, if we want to prevent them from happening in the first place, then prevention and our advocacy work are important as well. And so those are the other two parts of our strategy. We've got a renewed focus on prevention. We're just doing a review about how we deliver that at the moment, because, you know, we want to make sure we maximize our impact, that we're really focusing our limited resources where we can best make an impact in terms of prevention and our advocacy work as well. And I'm really pleased that, you know, we've got some great new members of the team leading on that. Emma Slavinsky, our new advocacy director, is bringing some really renewed leadership around our advocacy and prevention work as well. So, you know, I'm excited about the future of the RSPCA. It does feel like a time of renewal in the organisation. You know, after what have been a difficult few years, it's fair to say. You know, I've been in post, I'm in my 4th year now as Chief Executive. You know, it feels like a time of renewal and really focusing, you know, our family, because we are a family, we're a diverse family, on what that future can look like. And so that focus is kind of a really key part of what we're doing at the moment.
That's great, Chris. Thank you very much for that succinct explanation. Before we leave this, because we have, you know, we spent some time here, and quite rightly, because I think, you know, the RSPCA is, as I said, a unique and very significant organisation in British animal welfare. Is there anything that you would like to say that we haven't covered, or that you think we you know, that you would like to end with, or to just, you know, bring the thing to a close?
I think we've covered some really rich ground. I think that, you know, in this conversation, it reminds me about what an interesting time it is to be in the animal protection movement. And there is so much going on. I think, you know, the one thing I would kind of finish on is that, you know, to remind all your listeners that this is a conversation which transcends national borders. You know, animal welfare, animal protection is not just a thing for the jurisdiction of England. You know, and I think that's the thing that I take out of this conversation is that, you know, if we're going to have a kind of global society where animal welfare is at the heart, it's going to take different governments of different complexions to come together to achieve that. And that is why, just to finish, I'm really pleased that the RSPCA is a core founding member of the World Federation for Animals. James Yates has just taken the position of our first chief executive. That is an important collaboration of animal protection groups from across the globe, because we need that global voice. Because animal welfare, you know, when wild birds travel across the English Channel, they don't care whether they're going from French airspace to UK airspace. You know, when mice go through the Channel Tunnel, they don't care whether they're on the French side or the UK side. You know, animal welfare transcends national borders, and we need a global vision. And if you take anything from this, in our strategy, the RSPCA will continue to be a global organisation. It will still continue to have that internationalist view. That's incredibly important for me, for those reasons I've already said, and for our board of trustees. So yeah, we continue to be that international organisation. We're probably coming back a bit to the table after shying away in recent years, but we're back around the table with our voice and our evidence and our insight to bring to the conversation. But it's been a real pleasure to join you guys. Thank you so much for the invite, and I hope you got some interesting aspects of the conversation that are of interest to your viewers as well.
Oh, well, it's certainly interested me. I mean, you know, and I hope that they will be of interest to a much wider community. I mean, you know, it's been great talking to you, Chris. And I mean, just to add something to what you said about you know, the national borders. I mean, of course, we've been doing some work over the past year or so on fish, and there are whole ecosystems out there which are completely stateless, which have no, you know, kind of national category whatever, which doesn't stop them being exploited and doesn't stop them being denigrated. But you know, it's absolutely right that, you know, nations are not the container of nature. And thank you, as I said, Chris. I mean, I've enjoyed the last hour, and I hope you have. And as another organisation which is also part of the WFA, thank you for being with us. Thank you for contributing to this, and thank you, everybody out there, for watching this. And I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And hope to have, I know I say this with lots of contributors, but certainly Chris has a lot of interesting points to make, and I hope that we can get him back on again in the future to talk more about the work of the RSPCA and how that fits in with animal welfare in the UK and beyond. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.